SwoleBenji here. This is a continuation from the video titled The Fastest Possible Start for New Players. This is the Dungeon Chad PvP playstyle choice. The reason I've broken it up into Dungeon PvP or Gathering is because you will be highly successful and have massive profits if you focus on one or the other. If you try to focus on both, you will not advance as quickly, and there simply isn't enough learning points when you start out to do both in a reasonable amount of time. Learning points allow you to skip 80% of the leveling process, and you only get 10 per day, or 20 when you hit premium. To level just a weapon spec to 100 using learning points would cost 2,632, or 132 days worth. Gathering, crafting, and refining all would require a similar amount of points, and if you're splitting them up, you will level much slower. This game is all about being really good at just a few things. The faster you reach the upper tiers and specializations, the more you can accelerate your progress and money making. So, why choose the route of a Dungeon Chad? Why would you want to do this over being a Gatherer? Simple. Once you become a Dungeon Chad, you will make very decent silver per hour with only gear investments. It's very simple. No spreadsheets, no calculating profit margins, loss leaders, tax rates, market fluctuations. It's literally the most zug casual way of getting rich with the biggest benefit of also making you better at the game and stronger against other players. As a Dungeon Chad, you will be able to speed clear dungeons, collect a wide variety of loot, use the money you earn to further increase your power and speed, and ultimately have the specialization to be able to use very cheap, affordable sets to do the hardest dungeons or kill entire waves of players. Dungeon Chads only rely on themselves and are able to immediately start making major profits off their dungeon clears, which puts you initially ahead of the Gatherer. Gatherers will, eventually, through extreme hard work and massive investments, pull ahead of the Dungeon Chad in terms of money making. It leaves them inexperienced and forced to spend their fortune on tomes to level their combat abilities. Market swings or game changes can completely annihilate everything they've worked on. For example, the Swiftclaw used to be the #1 best-selling mount with major profit margins. It was recently nerfed, and the price dropped 66%. If you invested millions into the Swiftclaw breeding, you're literally going to be in the red trying to keep up with the market crash. Dungeon Chads have no such fear. Crafting and gathering cannot be unlearned. Combat can be respected, so if your favorite weapon receives massive nerfs, just unlearn it and put it into something else. Dungeon Chads can speed up the leveling process once they've maxed out a gear set. They can use auto-respec for a cost to essentially power level another gear set. When I did this, I was spending about 1 million silver an hour, making 1.2 million fame an hour, clearing group dungeons, which means I could level a new weapon to 100 in 3.5 hours with learning points, or about 17 hours without. Doing that, a Dungeon Chad would spend about 17 million, and a Gatherer would have to spend 102 million. Some of the richest, most powerful solo Gatherers only make around that much a month. Do you want to spend hours a day plugging data into spreadsheets, hours tending to farms, buildings with laborers, buy orders, traveling from town to town, undercutting every 30 minutes, and generally negotiating with a bunch of neckbeards? Or do you want to press 6 to 7 buttons and blow up dungeons and eventually players for a slot machine of loot? So what are the steps to become a Dungeon Chad? Well, you've already got Tier 5 Reaver, Tier 4.1 gear, and a nice chunk of starting money and a bunch of tomes ready to advance. Hopefully you took my advice in the previous video and have 3 characters all doing dailies. There are 2 ways of advancing. I recommend going the fastest way to clear dungeons, then using the speed from that to fund the auto respec into what you want to use to kill players or clear dungeons with. Let's say you want to be a PvP Warlock type character. Well, you could level through dungeons using a Curse Staff, but it's much slower to clear than if you were Bolt Casters. So you have to decide, do you want to make more money faster or only level what you want to use? Some weapons, like the Great Hammer, are just abysmally slow in clearing dungeons solo that it's not worth it at all, and you should use another build to clear and then spec into the hammer. So what is the fastest Tier 5 dungeon clearing build? And oh my god, did you just say Tier 5? Why would you ever do Tier 5 yellow dungeons over red and black zone dungeons? I will explain. First, let's cover why you should be doing Tier 5 yellow zone dungeons. Remember the first video? This continues the 100% risk-free method. And secondly, when I run the numbers, I make more money and spend less time doing bullshit like running around or baking loot like I do in the red or black zones. When you're doing T5 yellow dungeons, you can make around 450,000 fame an hour once you have decent gear, and also make anywhere from 250 to 800,000 silver an hour depending on the time of day and your luck. In red and black zones, you can technically make more silver and fame per hour if you were never dived, if you're willing to risk decent gear while negating the time that you spent fleeing back to town from running from gankers. Also, red and black zones, random dungeons are much fewer and far in between, and they take longer to find, and they spawn slower. I've ran a ton of tier 6 through 8 dungeons in the black zone, and on average I get dove by around 3 to 5 people every 1.5 dungeons. So I will complete one dungeon, do half of another, and then I have to fight or run away, and most groups are built on straight killing you. If I use a very cheap set of gear, the fame is decent, and if I loot something worth over 100,000, I have to spend 5 minutes running back to town, then back out again to continue. But for much less of a hassle, I can just chain T5 dungeons till my entire inventory is filled, then go to town and sell it all at once, all while watching anime, movies, hanging out with my girlfriend, using an exercise bike at the gym, cooking food, or other activities. The time spent not running between dungeons, running from players, or banking valuable loot that I could lose from being ganked far outweighs the gains of the black zone. So in the long run, when I do the math on spamming tier 5 dungeons over tier 6 reds or tier 7 and 8 black zones, I end up with more fame and more silver per hour due to the 0 risk and 0 time wasted. So what build is best for speed clearing dungeons? Now, if you've watched any other guide, asked in the game's chat channels, asked other players, or even Googled written guides, you'll be explicitly told by them that the Great Axe is the fastest dungeon clear in the game, followed by Permafrost, and then Blazing Staff. This is 100% incorrect. Yes, I am telling you straight up with all of my belief and math and numbers and playtesting that those, while fast and easy to play, are not the fastest dungeon clearing weapons. The fastest, highest DPS dungeon clearing weapon in the game is the Bolt Casters. Not only are crossbows the highest DPS weapon in the in-game PvE hardcore expeditions, the Bolt Casters themselves are the fastest trash mob clearing weapon and the fastest single target boss killer. With this, you will be able to kill mobs with just a few hits and immediately burst down bosses, while other builds chip away. A max spec Great Axe user with 8.3 gear clears dungeons slower than a 0 spec Bolt Casters user with tier 6. Put that into perspective. Why? Cooldowns and burst damage. Boltcaster has a Q ability called Explosive Bolt that hits harder than any other Q ability in the game, in a small area of effect with a less than 2-second cooldown that has a passive that immediately refreshes the cooldown. With just this ability, you can one-shot a lot of trash, 2-shot medium mobs, 3 to 4-shot tough mobs, and 1 to 2-shot everything with the red shrine, or just spam it as you run along with the blue shrine. Even when you start out with 0 spec and just a 4.3, you'll do way more damage than all the other weapons. Now for bosses, you hit them with the Sunder Shot and then you press E to delete their health bar. The only other weapon to come close is the Blazing Staff, but it's only half as strong as this burst. The only thing Great Axe really has going for it is it's naturally tanky, but with this Chad Gamer build, you kill mobs so fast you take very little damage. And if you bring food, you heal it up between pulls anyway. So what is this build? Well, I recommend Bolt Casters, Druidic Robe for the stacking damage buff, even post nerf. This thing is the secret to melting bosses. I also use a Spectre Hood to reset the cooldown of the chest ability, which, when you do so, keeps the damage buff fully stacked and extends it. You could use other helmets, but I choose this so I can run for longer doing more damage. For boots, use any of the leather ones for Refreshing Sprint. It doesn't really matter which one. Refreshing Sprint lets you shoot more Qs for the faster burst and helps you get your other cooldowns back as well. You can use a Limhurst Cape to keep your mana topped off if you don't feel like upgrading your armor along with your weapon. This is the fastest possible dungeon clear from 0 spec to 100 spec. Permafrost only gets good when you have 70 levels into Frost Staves. Blazing is fast, but is slower than Permafrost and Bolt Casters. Axes are tanky and noob friendly, but they really suck in PvP and are very slow in group dungeon clearings when you're solo, and just flat out lose to other weapons mentioned in solo dungeons. Because you'll always be moving, never really stopping, and immediately deleting bosses, you'll be making far more silver and fame than anyone else. That's the whole point, isn't it? So how do you get started with this? Remember in the first video how you bought a green tier 3 nature staff, then used a tome in your learning points to immediately go to tier 4? Well, for crossbows, you gotta use a broadsword in tier 2 first, then you get a crossbow in tier 3. You can use the tomes you got from Arena, or your daily challenge, or ones that you found in dungeons, or you can just buy them. Again, refer to the first video. If you can afford it, you want to buy a tier 4.3 bolt casters. Then when your level is high enough, tier 5.3 and then 6.3 and so on until you have 8.3. And sell the old set each time you upgrade. You then want to keep your armor up to date. If you want to hold more stuff, upgrade the bags and the mount you use. Once you've hit 7.3, you can pretty much steal anyone's dungeon and down anyone that tries to stay inside if you so desire. As you do dungeons, you'll be stockpiling lots of silver. If you want a riskier playstyle, you can use cheaper gear while faction flagged, and you'll make an extra 50,000 every 2 dungeons from the faction points. Just note that when I did this, I got dove by an enemy faction player every 5 to 10 dungeons, so you have to be alert when you're playing like this, because if you die, you drop all your stuff. Personally, I don't find this extra silver worth the trouble. Even if you aren't invaded, they can sit outside your dungeon and then try to dismount you when your shield wears off. It's just annoying and I don't recommend it. So, you want to do this dungeon chad thing long term, eh? Well, want a way to make even more money but only after a very heavy investment and long term playing? I highly do not recommend this, but it is an option if you so desire. That option is using mercenary laborers. A mercenary laborer will give you silver from 2 to 4,000 every 22 hours for filling out a tier 5 journal. You can fill one tier 5 journal from trash mobs before you even reach the first boss in most dungeons. And if you can clear a whole floor in 2 minutes, well, you can fill a ton of journals very quickly. The only problem is the startup cost. You need the cost of owning an island, the cost of housing, the cost of furniture, the cost of the laborers, and the fact that no one wants these things, so you can't really resell them when you get bored of them or want to try something else. So in the long run, it's going to take you 53 days of laborer rewards just to pay for themselves, and that's a big commitment. Right now, after about 504 hours of Slash Blade, I have about 99 laborers I use. If they were mercenaries, it would take 3.3 hours to have enough journals and another set ready to immediately turn in when they return. It doesn't sound too bad. That's about an extra 200 to 400,000 silver per day for doing something you're already doing. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, you gotta do 3.3 hours of dungeoning every single day. Some days I just want to do other things, or maybe take a break, or anything else than a dungeon. So they'd be wasted. You can't buy journals as they sell for a loss, and you can't sell them because no one buys them anyway. They are the worst laborer in the game for a reason. But if you want to do 2 straight months of 3.3 hour game sessions of dungeoning every day, hey, you'll break even. Then you can start making enough per month on average to buy a month of premium. That sounds good, right? Well, if you transition into the PvP Chad, which is your final evolution from Dungeon Chad, then you don't really have a reason to do dungeons anymore, and you might want to use your land to supplement your gear loadouts. Before we talk about evolving, you should be spending your learning points on your weapon specialization. Your armor and weapon mastery, that is, what allows you to equip and unlock better items, will be maxed out long before your specialization, and your spec is what gives you the most stats, so make sure to use learning points on specialization only. I recommend maxing out the weapon you use to dungeon farm and then whatever PvP set you wish to use. Alright, so you're max spec in the gear you want to use to PvP with, are you? I assume you picked something like bow, curse staff, daggers, swords, maybe maces. Maybe you're a sick twisted guy and you really like PvPing with the double-bladed staff, you miserable freak. Now what? Well, now you actually get to play the game. Yes, that's right. It's time to use your massive meaty item power advantage, that is, the gear score points from your levels empowering your gear to give you greater stats than others, to go hunt down and kill people for their loot. This is by far the most lucrative method of gaining money and also losing money there is. It's your choice if you want to solo a group dungeon full of mid-geared players, Or just use a very cheap set and blow up 1 or 2 guys and then try to escape their 10 other friends. Maybe you want to bait and trap people in a dungeon and then kill them and unfaction flag before things get messy. A PvP Chad is a man who rides around the world looking for fights, and it's winner take all. You either ride around faction flagged or go into the red and black zones. Gatherers are your prey. Crap geared players aplenty. Low spec whales are your meal of choice. Perhaps an AFK or a lagged out transport just full of free money. So the way a PvP Chad works is you put on your ideal gear set. Then you set out to see what happens. You'll win some, you'll lose a bunch due to unfair numbers or just being outplayed. But when you do get that 1 kill, that first double kill, that triple kill, that penta, oh man, does it feel good. And you will have all of their very expensive credit card bought loot as well. Imagine using a set of gear that costs you 50,000 and killing a player who has over 10 million worth of loot on him. It happens all the time, every day. All that time in the dungeons has finally paid off. And you have the bankroll to die hundreds of thousands of times with your cheap sets. The only dungeons you'll be doing is killing players foolish enough to not watch this video. There is such a good feeling of finding a gatherer out in the wild and just taking all of his resources and using it to fund even more ganks. Once you've reached this stage, you can use your accumulated items and wealth to build islands to fuel you with materials needed to make your items, make you money to go buy said items, or just grow your own mounts, your poisons and whatnot, and you'll be using whatever you use for your kills. If your island supplies you with a 45 resupplies, then you can literally go out and die in your gear set 45 times before it starts actually costing you anything other than your own time. Every PvP Chad I know doesn't even bother with islands because the loot they liberate is worth so damn much more that they don't even need to bother setting up any of that stuff anyway. If anything, they just rent, sell, or give their house and farm plots to their gatherer friends to use. So what build is good at killing players? Well, for that you need to go to the PvP Chad himself. Toxic AF, formerly known as Powerful Noun. Go check out his channel, links in the description. There are many other paths a dungeon and a PvP Chad can take, but these are the basic ones for new players that are straightforward, fast, and profitable. For instance, you could main tank group dungeon, you could do group faction dungeons, you could group gank dungeons. You'll discover all these as you play. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want, join the Discord where we can plan some PvP Chad ganks, or if you just need some questions answered, or if you want to do group stuff. The Streamlabs link is if you're feeling generous and want to give me a donation. I generally appreciate everyone who's donated. I read that wrong. I eternally appreciate everyone who's donated so far. You guys are based Chads. The next video will be about the Gatherer path, which is much more complex, so I hope you're ready to do lots of math. Anyway, lads, thanks for watching, and don't forget that if you want to try this game out, it's completely free. There's a link in the description and pinned comment. I want to extend a thank you to everyone that used the link so far and upgraded to premium. You lads got me a cool direwolf skin and some extra gold. I really do appreciate it. As always, be a bro and stay swole.